just a few points from last time, just to finish up things. A little bit in Yibum, and then a little more in Chalitzah. I'd like to make the following point, and I was bothered for quite a while, and I have no clue. Now at least I have some clue. Okay, maybe. What we had, we set up in the Arabic two separate classes of mitzvahs. One called Shrana, which is a hira, like the mitzvahs of Tumah, Tafar Zadorim, Torah Nitan, Shemrim. And then we found another class of mitzvahs, which the Ram calls Bikon. Both of them, there's no tzivui, muchletes, there's no command, that's what I would assume. And it just says the translation of Bikon is to be in the state of, without any verb. Okay, so both of them, a priori, violate Sherish Shmini, where the Ram says that mitzvahs are imperatives, commands, from a linguistic point of view. And what you have in both of these cases, there's no real command. Okay, so what you have to say, at least in terms of the broad issue of what's going on, both of them, that there is if the Torah wants, if the Torah legislates a religious law, the assumed or the implied, there's an implied command to act according to religious law. Or if the Torah tells you that there should be a state of, the implied command is that one should make sure this happens. Okay. So the question I was always bothered by, not always, but at least when I was aware of these two concepts, is what's the difference? Why does the Rambam find it necessary to coin two different words which a priori have the same concept, that there's no real command? So I think the first thing that you have to do when you're thinking about it is when the Rambam talks about all these mitzvahs which we call Bikon, the Rambam calls Bikon, in the state of Mishmores, in the state of Tmura, in the state of Kedushat Neter Avoy, in the state of Achilas Po'alim, the Rambam does not use the word Shrana. The Rambam uses the word Amar, which seems to be a tzivur buchletes. And the question is there ramifications of this, and what does this mean? See, remember, we pointed out that the Minchas Chinuch, he throws Gershon, and I'm not sure exactly that should be in. We'll see about that. Doing that sometime in the near future. But he says, Toyin v'nitan, or the midst of Tumah, there's no kiyum. It means in Shrana, there's no kiyum. You're just doing you're acting according to Torah law, religious law, but there's no kiyum. It's not like putting on tefillin or wearing tzitzis. So the question is there kiyum in a mitzvah which is bikon? And l'chayra, the answer is absolutely yes. And even if you're going to tell me, and I would tell you, says Ramah, And even you're going to tell me that what I said last week or 2 weeks ago, that the mitzvah of Yibum is to be in the state of a marriage with Yibum, not just the mitzvah is the Maaseh. The mitzvah of Chalitzah is to be in the state of that Shem Ginai, Beis Chalutza. So you tell me, maybe, I've taken it too far, but you'll certainly admit that, for example, in Tmura, to be in the state of Tmura, the mitzvah is to be noyeg with the Kedushas Tmura on Tmura. And since the Gemara says by Tmura, Lav Anitik Aseh, and we talk about Lav Anitik Aseh, you talk about Kiyum or Lo Kiyum, so you're talking about something which is the Kiyum HaMitzvah. So it means there's a Kiyum HaMitzvah in Tmura. And certainly, if you accept what I said, when you talk about Yibum, the Gemara talks about Yibum Aseh Chalitzah. So there's the Kiyum, and even though the Aseh Chalitzah depends on the Maaseh Mitzvah, if there's no Kiyum in the performance, you can't have Aseh Chalitzah. So this is not what I'm not trying to do at the moment, is explain conceptually what's going on, but just from a conceptual, categorical point of view, that you should not define Shurana as a bikon, because the bikon are mitzvahs which have a kiyum, and it's sivum muchletes. It's just the sivum muchletes, so you can have in the Torah an implied mitzvah. Sometimes it can be muchletes, and sometimes it ain't muchletes. Depends whether it's hora. If it's just religious law, where there's logically no kiyum, it's just a shrana. Whereas in the mitzvahs which are bikol, there clearly is a tzivur muchletes, even though it's only inferred or implied from it. And there's a kiyum. Which is certainly, it sets the two things apart and explains something else. The Rambam doesn't make a big deal in Minyan HaMitzvah about Bikon. He doesn't set up Kilo a new category like he introduces in Mitzvah Tzadihei, Haforis Nedorim, and he tells us a new category called Ashurana, and he defines what it is in all places. When it comes to Bikon, he sends it in a nonchalant way in Mishmoros. Similarly, when it comes to Tmura. Similarly, when it comes to Neter Avoy. And similarly, when it comes to Achilas Poland and Yibum and Chalitzah. And there's no, there's no definition statement, there's no pashlets about it. He just says it. And he defines a new category of Shurana only when he deals with Aforis Nedorim, Uchedoima. So it means this conceptually is not a new category. It is an Amar, it is a Tzivur Muchletes. It just lacks a verb and is an assumed command. And the assumed command is a very interesting command. The command is to be in a state. So that's my first comment. I'm not sure how helpful, useful it is, but I think for categorizing things, it can be very helpful for us. Next, we were discussing, when we were talking about Chalitzah last time, whether the mitzvah is a mitzvah noshim, and we pointed out that the chinuch says that the mitzvah is not a noshim. And we pointed out the problem that the mitzvah, it has many parts, and most of the parts are only done by noshim, and they're not mechuyev. And what do you say, kofer on mitzvahs? You can kofer a woman because of the man's mitzvah. You can kofer someone else to help somebody else. The whole thing becomes very strange. We don't know what's going on. I just wanted to point out that the Loshen of the Rambam in HaKotzer clearly seems to say that the mitzvah is on the Isha. Reish Yud Zayin, lachleitz liyovom. The verb lachleitz liyovom. So that seems to say that someone is doing a pula, the woman is obligated to do a chalitzah to the oven. That's what I would assume. But, okay, so that's, I just wanted to point the Lashon out in the Min HaKotzer. Now, I like to do the end of Mitzvahs Chalitzah, which really is not about Chalitzah or Yibum, but it's about general principles in Minyan Mitzvahs, and we'll see. Ukva hisba'aru mishpatei mitzvazo b'mesechta hamechuberes lezeh or meyuchedes lezeh v'hi meseches Yevamos. Ukva yodato loshon omrom mitzvahs yibum kodemes lemitzvahs chalitzah, which is the Mishnah B'cheres in Perek Aleph, Mishnah Zayin. So, a priori, had he not continued, I would have said that he wanted to just make a statement that you know clearly that the two separate mitzvahs, mitzvahs yibum, mitzvahs chalitzah, because it says mitzvahs yibum, kodemes mitzvahs chalitzah, that each one is a mitzvahs yibum and a mitzvahs chalitzah. And the truth is, that the Rambam's Loshen and Aseh Pei Beis would support this. The Ram says, Hine Yodei Hokel ki ahekish hoy mechayiv zeh, that basically, the Ram asks the question, Arifa should have been a fikr, should have been part of the mitzvah of Pidyon Petach Hamor. And I have this option or that option. I either have an option of Pidyon or the option of Arif. It should be one mitzvah. In a Yodei Okel, ki ahekish hoye mechayiv zeh, lulei mashe motzonu l'Rabbeinu zichronim levocha, loshon yoira al hayosim shtei mitzvahs, because the Matiki Ashmur said that it's two mitzvahs. Vu omram mitzvahs b'diyah kedemes l'mitzvah arifa. Right, and that means they're two separate mitzvahs. Mitzvahs yibum kedemes l'mitzvah chalitzah, which means it's two separate mitzvahs. Ukamo she'ayavomo muchuchenes, im liyibum o lechalitza. And you could have imagined that it was only a fikah, two options. But we know hayibum mitzvah, v'chalitza mitzvah, kol achas b'fnei atzmo, k'mot niyiska, kain petachamo, muchon o lepediyah, o la'arifa, v'zu mitzvah, k'mot she'amarnu. Because mitzvah, this mitzvah and that mitzvah, means that if it's mitzvah this and mitzvah that, we're not just kodemus, not kodemus, but it means two separate mitzvahs. And that's what he quotes it in the mitzvah from Arifa to prove there's a mitzvah pidyon and Arifa. Mitzvah's pediyah, kodemus, the mitzvah Arifa. But not only from the way the words of the Rambam follow, that you see that it really is, there's a different thing in mind here, because the question is like this, very odd. You see, the Rambam usually finishes a mitzvah and says, whatever it is, period. So if he wants to bring a proof that it's a mitzvah, it should have been before. Not after that he says, not after he says it's Meseches Yevomis. So you get the impression, from an organizational point of view, the Rambam here is bothered by something about Masechta Yevomis. And that's what he continues. And he says, Kfar Yodato, Loshen Omrom, Mitzvas Yibum, Kedemis the Mitzvah Chalitzah, Ulchein Nikla HaMasechta Yevomis. V'afapi, Shehi Koleles Dine Ayibum V'Chalitza B'Shova. There's an equal distribution of dinim of Yibum and Chalitza. And the reason why the Rambam is bothered why she called Yevomis. Or maybe, we'll see later, that the fact that the mitzvah, that the dinim of Chalitza are on a Masechta called Yevomis, maybe it's all one mitzvah. And in Chalitza is a fikah of Yevomis. So why is this called Yevomis? So he says, since mitzvah Yibus Kodemus mitzvah Chalitza, so you name the Masechta after the Ika mitzvah. That's what happened. The Afalpi, and then his apology. Shehi kolelis dine ayivu v'chalitza b'shov. So that is what the words say, I think. But there's a problem, The whole question and the assumption that he asked the question doesn't make any sense. That the name of the Masechta has to do with the mitzvah, and if you have two mitzvahs in the Masechta, and it's called after one of the mitzvahs, so maybe it's a raya, the other mitzvah is not a mitzvah. Who said all this? Where does this come from? So this is like an amazing thing. See, the Rambam doesn't tell you where he's coming from. He just kilu asked the question, and that's the Afalpi, that it's he's apologizing that the Masechta is called Yevomis, even though it has dinim of Yibum and Chalitza, the two separate mitzvahs. And the answer is mitzvahs Yibum kodemus mitzvah Chalitza. And if mitzvah Chalitza would be kodemus the mitzvahs Yibum, then the Masechta would be called Chalitza. So the question is, what is the Ram coming from? What is this? So there's not much information out there. I'll try to build it from a few tidbits of information here and there, and I'm not sure how convincing the case is. It's certainly a possibility, and there are two options. Either you can say tzorchim, or you can have another answer maybe, or listen to what I'm suggesting. If you recall, the Gemara in Eruvin has a discussion in Dalet Amud Beis about how Moshe Rabbeinu taught Torah. So a priori, the discussion is about teaching Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu was Rabban Shel Yisrael, and how did he teach Torah? The Rambam Pirush Mishnayos goes a lot further and say it's not just that that Moshe Rabbeinu was teaching Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu was teaching Taryag Mitzvos. And as he says in Mishnah Torah, V'etnocho as a Torah v'as a mitzvah, Torah zu Torah shebiksav, v'amitzvah Torah shebapeh. Every mitzvah had its Torah shebiksav, which they were reading, and Moshe read to them, or they read to themselves. They had it written down in front of them. And Moshe Rabbeinu told them the Torah shebapeh of each individual mitzvah. And that limud of teaching the Torah shebapeh on Taryag Mitzvahs, the Gemara in Eruvin calls it Ketzad Seder Mishnah. The question then, so means the Mishnah that Moshe Rabbeinu taught was certainly some redaction of Taryag Mitzvahs. And the Mishnah embodied the Torah Shebapeh in an organized fashion of all Taryag Mitzvahs. The question is, the fact that Rabbeinu HaKodesh calls the Mishnayos Mishnah, or was called Mishnah, and the fact that the limud of Moshe Rabbeinu was called Mishnah, is it just a coincidence? Or there's something more to it? Namely, that part of the kavanah of Rabbeinu HaKodesh in the Seder HaMishneh was to somehow present something like a Seder of Taryag Mitzvahs. This a priori sounds wild, but I'm only prepared to suggest it because I have a line in the Akdama Minyan HaMitzvos that would support it. The Rambam is debating with himself how he should organize Mishnah Torah. Remember, Mishnah Torah is the conglomerate of Taryag Mitzvahs. And he says like this, Kashe kivanti bedaiti hatachlis azois, to write Mishnah Torah containing the hilchos of the Taryag Mitzvahs, samti machshavoisai, machshavti, be'eze ponim achalik, hachibur, v'shorov. How do I organize the Taryag Mitzvahs? How do I organize Mishnah Torah? Eich lo yishiyeh. How is it? What is it? Im achalkenu k'moi chiluk HaMishnah v'yaspik lidalkoi. I'll do it like Rabbeinu HaKodesh. O achalkehu chiluk acher, v'aktim v'acher lefima shechayiv ho'iyun shehu ayoyse roy v'ayoyse nakel lilmoy. That an organized and a fashion conception which will help the loymed. See, he chose the latter. But what is the fact that Rabbeinu HaKodesh wrote the Mishnah and was machalik in Mishnayis? Why should that have anything to do with writing Mishnah Torah, which is Seder of Taryag Mitzvos? So I was wondering here also, you see something which you don't understand 100%, that Rabbeinu HaKodesh in the Machshava of Bisader Mishnayis, there was some attempt to encapsulate Taryag Mitzvos and the Seder of the Mitzvos. And therefore you could ask a question, why is it called Masechta Yevomis? It should be called, part of it should be called, or called, it should, part of it should go, it should be split up to two Masechtas, Maseches Yevomis, Maseches Chalitzah. So the answer is that the Masechta is named after Ikar Mitzvah. And since Mitzvah's Yibum is Kaid in the Mitzvah Chalitzah, Yibum is the Ikar Mitzvah. Even though they're separate mitzvahs. I found a similar thing in Rabbi Yochanan Polau, in Aseh Aseh Ayin Vav, the Kavanosei, the Loi Mishum the Chalitzah B'chlal Yibum, Korum Yevomet, Koru Yevomes, the Vadai Shemus Chalukim U'Mitzvah Fnei Atzma Ninu. Doesn't explain what the Masechta has to do with anything, 100%. Elo Mishum Di Yibum Hi Ikar Mitzvah, V'hi Kademis Chalitzah, Hilkoch Korum Yevomes, V'chein Muchach L'cheur B'kavanas HaRambam, Dim Loi Kain Seiv Devor V'einu Muvodim Klal. So he says, that's what the words seem to say, but he hasn't explained it. What I tried to do is explain it a little bit. Whether I'm successful or not, I can't tell you at all. Next. Mitzvah Reish Yud Ches. Mitzvah Hashmone Esrei Umosayim 2:18. He shetziva oines lisa es anusasai. See here again. To say the Divrei Rambam here in Minyan Mitzvahs, that after the mitzvah of Ishus, of the mitzvah Kuchim, B'Kedusha, and Nisuin, Regilim, there's the peculiar case of Yibum Chalitzah, and then the cases which are very, very rare in terms of Ishus. The mitzvahs Nisuin of Oines and Shem, Motzi Shemra, and then he has the mitzvah Mufater, which we'll see probably there's no mitzvah of Nisuin. Now, what's interesting over here, the Rambam is very clear that the mitzvah of Oines and Anusasai is Nisuin. We saw he come and Mekadeshes, Arat Mekudeshesli, and not have Nisuin, you wouldn't be kind of mitzvah. And that you see not only over here, but you see it in the Minyan Mitzvah Kotzeh, in the Protein Mitzvahs, in Ilchus Nara Psula, in Perek Aleph, Halacha Gimel, in the Sefer Chinuch, and the Minchas Chinuch also takes as a double portion, in Mitzvah Kuf Nun Zayin, Kuf Nun Ches, and the Rambam here also is only talking about Nisuin. Now, it's a strange word over here, anusa. How do you know who's anusa or who's mafute or what are the categories? So the Rambam clearly explains this in Perek Aleph Halacha Beis. Ve'ezeu mafate, ve'ezehi oines, in Hilchos Nara Psula, mafate l'ritzoino, ve'oines shebo leho bal kocho. He says like this. So, but how do you know the difference? How do you know what's be'oines and what's be'rotzoin? Kol niv-eles b'sodeh harizu b'cheskas anusa. If the Maisebiyah is in the Sodeh, then we assume it's an anusa unless proven otherwise. V'dona b'din oines ad she'idu ho'edim shebiritzoino nivolo, unless it's clear to the edim that it was b'rotzon. V'chol niveles be'ir harizu b'cheskas mefuta. Mipnei shelo yizoko ad she'idu ho'edim shehi anusa. Because in ear, she sort of screamed. And if the edim don't hear the scream, it's a raya doch she's the mefuta. Kagoin, and I'm not sure. And how did they know that she didn't scream machmas oines? The edim see that he has a sword. Shesholaf cherev, v'omar lo im tizaki arog oisoch. I'll kill you. So it's clear that the Edom, the Soda, are done it as an onus unless they see some otherwise. And in the ear, they done it as a mefuta unless they see otherwise. The Ramban does a similar thing in Chumash. The Ramban al Atera, Devorim Chav Beis Chav Gimel, Al Inyan HaKosuv, Ki kasher nira sho'ish oiches bo v'shoiches imo, nidoin ho'isha ki misratze, ba'avur shehois yicholo livosha mimenu, v'nechshav ho'ish ki ma'ana oisa, ki lo pita, v'lo diba alibo lishoma elov, v'lo yadati b'dina za'oka. He says he doesn't know why it talks about tza'aka. Imu inu naira shehichzik bo ish v'hi nilchemes boy b'chol koicha u'boicha v'yochezes b'vgodov o b'saroisov lihimoleit mimenu V'lo yod litz oik loma tisokel. Here he's talking about the case of an Eishes Ish. El gam tzoka behave lodun gam bo minastam beir mufute ubesod anusa. So you need chazokas around to change it. But minastam ir is mufute and soda is anusa. Ramban's working like that also. The Rambam also says it by Knas, but I assume it applies in all cases. The Rambam says that the onus is not only a na'ara, but it's any girl from 3 to the end of na'aros. The Rambam in Hilchos Naira B'sula Perek Aleph Halacha Ches Mirosa Yiyeh Lebas Knas Me'acha Sholosh Shonim Gemuros Ad Shetivgo until she becomes a begeres. Nivolo B'teich Sholosh Shonim Ein Bios Bia Bo Leo Misha Bogra Ein Lo Knas Shel Naira B'sula V'loi Begeres. Shenema Naira B'sula V'loi Begeres. So I assume the same thing is also the mitzvah of Nisuin is also in a ketana, but depending upon if the father wants or not. Now, the Rambam continues. It's Chetzivo Inis Lisa Es Anusasa. V'omrei yis'ale v'lo yisiyeh li'isha tachas she'ina lo yuchal l'shalcha kol yomov. So l'cheira, I already said v'lo yisiyeh li'isha tachas she'ina, and that's it. What is the end of the Ram? Lo yuchal shalcha kol yomov. Now, the truth is, in Ibn Tibbon, it just says, "V'lo yisiyeh li'isha tachas v'lo yisiyeh li'isha v'goymer." We don't know where to stop. The Ram, the two things, tachas she'ino, that it's clear we're talking about oinus, and then lo yuchal shalcha kol yomov, we don't understand b'chlal what this has to do here. So I think this is an intro to the discussion of lav shekodmo Aseh. So if it's a lav shekodmo Aseh, that the Aseh preceded it, the Aseh has to be written, and then the lav. V'lo yisiyeh li'isha tachas she'ino lo yuchal shalcha kol yomov. Ukfa hisboye b'gmor makis, that's tesvav and aleph, shezeh halav shel oines shuhu lo yuchal shalcha, hu lo yisaseh shekodmo aseh. And l'chei, the proper reading is, I don't know what Ibn Tibbon has over here, v'kach nimnu v'gomru. Lo yisaseh shekodmo aseh. What do you mean nimnu v'gomru? I don't know what that means. Nimnu k'talos aseh. So it's v'kach omru V'kach omu v'amai loisaseh shekodmo asehu. This is a loisaseh which preceded by an aseh. So it means if it's kodmo aseh and the Ram, so it means, and since the Gemara says asehu shekodmo aseh, it's a raidoch, it's a aseh in the minion. Especially if you learn that that a lav shekod maseh has the din of lava nitak laseh, as the Gemara seems to say, as the Ram calls it Mishnah Torah a few times. So I would assume then that it means that in these mitzvahs there's a kiyum in the Nesuin of Oinus. There's a kiyum in the fact that he remains married to the Motzi Shemra. And if he violates a lav of a yuchol shalcha, I guess the kiyum or calls man that he can be mekayim or bittul or kiyum or kiyum, that is the poiter. Now, so the reason derech agav that I go with this girsa, because in the Ksav Yad of Kapach it says Vamai leisasa kodol asehu, which is Lashon of the Gemara, or in Bloch it says Vama, which really is the Arabic to say Vamai. So once the Ram is clearly saying it, I felt that no, it's the proper text should be V'omu v'kach omu v'amai leisaseh shekod ma'asehu. Now, so then it means see, it's not clear. Let's start like this. Is the Ram trying to prove there's an Aseh of Oinus? Since the Torah says Lo Yisiyeh Leisha, maybe that should be enough. Or maybe there's a different issue. Maybe the issue is maybe the Aseh and the Lav should be counted as one. And this is what he points out in Shiur Shishi, that the three types of Aseh and Lo Yisaseh together. There's Aseh v'lo yisaseh b'dov echad. They're like the mirror image of each other, like Shabbos and lo yisaseh kol malacha, Tishbos and lo yisaseh kol malacha. Then there's a lav shekodmo Aseh, like Oinus and Motzi Shemra. And then there's lav adita Aseh, like Shalech Teshal Zaim. And the Rambam was coming to grips in Shiur Shishi whether these are two mitzvahs or only one mitzvah. And the truth is, Rav Saadik Goyim categorically disagrees with Shiur Shishi, and says that it's really only one mitzvah. And you see in the Chsimus HaSefer, Rav Sadi Goin, on page 246, I read it to you. He says like this: V'kivun shahete lecho balechayim amala geiru v'shoisei shesa v'hete ti'ira behema tehera huwa isa al ma she'eno mala geiru v'eno shoisei shesa. Either the eating is the ones that are mala geiru shoisei shesa, and the ones that are not, you enjoin from eating. Hechshavnu es shtehen mitzvah achas. When the Aseh and the loises of dova echod, he counts it as one. So that means oines and Motzi Shemra should be one mitzvah. We only have a line in Motzi Shemra which you can derive something from, but you can't derive anything about this in his Sefer Mitzvahs, so we can't really say anything, but his approach, his conceptual approach to Minyan Mitzvahs should require this. Now, we read this whole mitzvah, let's just finish it. Hine kvar isbor boyer she'omroi v'lei se'li isha mitzvahs aseh. The boiler shelo siele mitzvahs aseh ukvar isboyer dini mitzvah zo b'shlishi levi miksuvas. The question which you have to ask yourself now is what happened to the mitzvah of knas? The Torah says, in the beginning of the pasuk, it says, "V'nosan ho'ish ashoichev imo lavi hana'aro chamishim kosef v'lo siyeh li'isha tachat she'ino lo yuchal shalcha kol yomov." So there's a mitzvah of knas, there's an aseh of marrying her, and there's a lav of divorcing her. Then we have another problem. In Mitzvah Chof, the Ram clearly mentions Knas. He says Hatzivish Tavinu Bedin. He doesn't mention it in Minyan Mitzvah itself. Bedin Amafate V'Omo Yisale Ki Yifate Ish Psula. However, he mentions it in the Minyan HaKotze. Lodun b'mefat b'futeh b'chamishim shekel. Im shar dinov shnei ki yifate ish. And in Minyan HaKotze, in Oines, there's no mention of Knas. And l'chayra, even in Minyan HaMitzvah itself, when he talks about the din mufate, l'chayra, he means Knas. So I would tell you the following. that the Rambam, l'cheira, the Lodun bedin mefuta, he learns that the Knas is not a tzivui muchot, but it's a shrana. Lodun bedin Knas. Lodun bedin mefuta. Lodun mefuta b'chamishim shekel. Lodun means the shrana. So, what I would suggest is the Ram's opinion when you have a mitzvah which contains both an amal, a tzivui muchot, and a shrana, the Ika mitzvah is the amal, and that's all that's mentioned in Minyan HaMitzvos. So therefore, the Rambam says the mitzvah is lo yeh lo si. However, when it comes to Mefater, where it's only a shrana, the mitzvah is the din Mefater, or the mitzvah is lodum bedin knas of 50 shekel. That's what I would suggest. Okay. Now, we're going to have to, and let me just read a little bit, we're going to have to explain, over here, it's very odd, in the next mystery test, the Ram says, Din Motzi Shemra, Kloi Meshivonol Al Kaisai, U Shetishoye Ishtoi, she remained married. And here, Lefi Sheba Boy, Gamkein, V'lo Yisir Liisha, Lo Yuchal L'Shalcho, Kol Yomo. So here, there's also no mention of Knas. But here he says the Din. So it means, does it mean that all the principle we set up before is nonsense? We'll see, Mitzvah Shem. Let's just read a little bit over here. VaMitzvah atishah esrei u'masayim he din Motzi Shema, which is in the Arabic. Kloima shetzivonu al kaisai u'shetishoy ishtay imay lefi sheboboy gamkein v'lo yiseh liisha lo yuchal l'shalcha. So here in the ratio test, let me show you something. You see, when it came to the mitzvah of mefater, the Ram says, al tashriya, shrana. When it comes to the mitzvah of oines, he says, amal. So, knas, excuse me, oines is an amal, mefater is a shrana. What about Motzi Shemra? See, you said a priori. That was the whole base of the question. The Ram says the din. But din Motzi Shemra. However, if you look at the Rambam, he says, din Motzi Shemra, a'ani kloima, alamal, amal no. It is a tzivui muchletes. Lal kaisai, ushitishoy ishto imoy. Lefisha gam boy ne'emal, v'lo yiseh li'isha, v'lo yuchal. Lefi shegam boy, that it's the same amar as it was before. So it means very clearly that the principle is correct. There's an amar of Motzi Shemra, and the amar itself has two parts. There's an amar to give a malchus, and amar that he should remain married, and then tucked away, there's a hurrah of a sharana of knas. And therefore, the same way knas is not mentioned in the mitzvah of anusa, we mentioned the ikar mitzvah, anusasai, the oines lisa anusasai, and the Motzi Shemra, the Malki Moisai, and the Shoy Ishtoi, because the ikar mitzvah and the amar is what he mentions, Malk Lahal Kaisai, and the Shoy Ishtoi. However, the Shrana is not mentioned, both in Onus and in Motzi Shemra, and it's mentioned in Akotze only in Mefater, and that's what the din is of Mefater. And there it's a Shrana. So since itself is a Shrana, the reference to it in the Minyan HaMitzvah itself is A-okay. Now, the next question we have to ask ourselves is Lahal Kaisai. So where does it say Lahal Kaisai? The pasuk says, "V'lochu zikneu ir hahu esoish v'yisroi soid v'om chav beis yudches." And the Gemara Ksuva says, the Memvav Moralis, v'yisru ze malchus. So offhand, this is it's very simple. So there's a v'yisroi soid, and Isha, and it's a Tzivui Muchot. Both of them are Mal, and they are the Ikar Mitzvah. The problem is, if you look in the Drosha and the Gemara Ksuvas, how it actually learns out V'Yisru is Malchus, you ask yourself, isn't this a Drosha? Gemara Ksuvas Memomar Aleph, El V'Yisru Ze Malchus Manolan. How do you know V'Yisru? Make it taste that it's Malchus? You're scolding it. Omer Rababo, Omer Ravo, Lomadnu Yisru mi Yisru v'Yisru mi Bein u'Bein mi Bein v'hoye im bin akois harosha. So it's mamish this gzeirah over that and this and that. So a priori, it's a drosha. It's true bin hakois harosha that there's malchus, but that v'Yisru oisai pshuto shal mikra is malchus is very difficult. And if it's not pshuto shal mikra, according to Sheris Beis, it has nothing to do with Minyan HaMitzvos. So what you have to say is the Rambam learned, and we'll see maybe more Mitzvah Shem next week, that there's a Pirush Mekubal that v'Yisru, and the Gemara only quotes Manolon as the Remez for the Pirush Mekubal. The Mitzvah Shem will pick up next week.